I was just talking to my husband who is managing all sorts of technical problems this morning, not the least of which is I forgot my stand. So there we go. I'm kind of catawampus, but whoops, I guess that won't work. I may just have to hold this. Let's see if I can put that there. Well, I think I have engineered something with my teacup. So apparently that will work until it doesn't. Or until I forget and take a cup of tea, a sip of tea, which I hope I won't do. I hope you all have had a great week. I certainly have. Hello, Jim. Nice to know you're online. We're going to talk about self-attack today. While this may not be a very pleasant subject, because I don't think anybody, hello Lisa, I don't think anybody wants to say, oh my God, I'm self-attacking, and I don't think any of us want to see how harsh we're being to ourselves and what we're doing to self-attack, and all sorts of, by the way, subtle, and thank you Lisa, I love you too, and not so subtle ways. I think it's such an important thing to talk about, really I do. There are so many aspects to this. It is what I really kind of harp on for several quarters in my teaching. You know, I teach classes about all this. They're certainly self-healing classes, but they're also to train people to do what I do. And hello, Kat. Hello. Happy Sunday to you, Kat. And so we are going to talk about this very important subject today. I want to dedicate this show, not because of the subject matter, just because of the day, to my dear friend Elizabeth, who passed away this year. This was her birthday, her earthly birthday today. So she is very much indeed on my mind, and I'm sure very much here with us as we teach this today. All right, so let's do a quick prayer, get us all on the same page, of course, and then we're going to launch in with this. Our call-in number, you might want to make a note as well, to also 347-850-1647. So, here we go. Dear God, who is all there is, you who are all we are and all everything is in this world, we are so grateful for the trees and the sky and the air and the sea and the animals all around us, our friends, our families, the story just as it is and the story that is ever changing. We open ourselves now to see, hear, sense, and know what you would have us do as the next step in our progress of release, of healing, of love. We say now, in all sincerity and gratitude, that we know nothing, for it is the you through us, and through all things that know it all. We open ourselves to this, dear God, that we may hear what you would have us do, and we accept it with all grace. Thank you, dear God, for all of this. We say this prayer now, in your name, in the name of the Ascended Masters, our love-centered guides and friends, and in the name of each and every person listening to the show today. And so it is. Amen. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, before we start, just so I do not forget, Jim Sadler, who is on the line and said hello first, has created the most wonderful app. It's for iPhones. It's for my second book. You know, you can get the book itself. You can get that through my website too, which is marthaburgessnovak.net. We're .net, not a .com. And it's called The Teacup Prophecies. My first book is called The Life You Want. But The Teacup Prophecies is the one that Jim has made into this fabulous app for the iPhone. The Droid version is going to come out in a few months, but the iPhone now is available at the App Store. It's only 99 cents. It delivers a spiritual message to you every day, although you can get on it multiple times a day and get ascended messages. It works as an oracle. We hope you enjoy it, and we hope you'll get it. We try to make it extremely reasonable for you, so you will, and we want you to use it. We hope you will. It's also a wonderful way to get some ascended information to you in the most pleasant manner. So we hope you'll enjoy that. Okay, and there are also a lot of other offerings we have on that website we hope you'll enjoy too. So today we're going to talk about self-attack. I want to first define it. Self-attack is when you consistently think very negative thoughts about yourself. That's self-attack. We're going to give you examples. We're going to make sure you understand this. We're going to try to drill down actually into some very specific ways you're doing this, ways that you might not in the beginning of this lecture say is a self-attack, but most distinctly and definitely are, and interpreted by you, your being, as that. We're going to make those well known too. Okay. You know, I think of self-attack as rather terrorism. It's a very personal terrorism. And everyone does it, and no one escapes from dealing with it. You either deal with it by doing it over and over again and never changing, which diminishes, by the way, the happiness in your life considerably, or you deal with it by addressing it, confronting it, changing it, and going on and being happier. So, let's talk about how self-attack starts. You were born, no matter what you think about yourself, I'm going to tell you, you were born a very good child. Every single one of you. Some of you, in fact, were keenly sensitive. Probably anybody who listens to the show. I'd be surprised if you weren't. So, you are the undeveloped whole, W-H-O-L-E, as a child. Undeveloped because you don't have the developed brain, the life experience, the understanding of how things work in God from a more global perspective that puts everything that happened to you in a context. Instead, you see things from a very narrow perspective, which is the only kind of understanding that was available to you as a child. So, you're born into your family and there are imbalances. Now, I want to say there are imbalances in every family, and we are beyond talking about good and bad parenting right now. This is just what happens in families. There are always imbalances. And what causes all the trouble is our perception of these imbalances and what we do with them on a consistent basis that become our patterns. Okay. So, by way of example, let's say you grow up in a household where one or both parents don't know how to handle their emotions. Let's say there are a few or a lot of rage explosions. There might even be a consistent, constant harangue of criticism in that household from one or both parents. There are, and by the way, this can be very overt, or this can be someone who is very depressed and who keeps those secret criticisms of themselves to themselves, but yet it comes out in the way they live and what they tolerate about themselves. When I think of a constant harangue, though, I'll give you a memory that just came to mind as I was putting some notes together. I had a friend's mother who told herself and everybody else that her horrible and very destructive criticism was, and I quote, constructive criticism. Her family has heard it their whole lives. She was a narcissist to the extreme, and this thing she told herself and others about constructive criticism only meant to anybody who knows psychology that she was going to do it again and again and again and again and again. She was very OCD. She was going to do, and a narcissist, and she was going to do exactly as she damn well pleased, and she was telling everybody nobody was going to stop her, because after all, this was constructive, right? I know for a fact she messed up 3 generations of people with her imperious and self-absorbed attitude. And it was a very sad thing to see. I was even aware of it when I was a child. Now, let's go directly back to our subject. If you grew up with any kind of criticism, extreme or mild, there's a kind of predictability about it, and anything you can predict, the child's mind perceives as having an element of safety about it. Hello, Dominique. So glad you're joining us. So anything that's predictable, even if it is hurtful, like criticism, if it happens enough, and if you are sensitive enough, we perceive it as safe because you can predict it. That's how the ego child's mind interprets this, the child's mind that you are. Okay, so in an odd roundabout way, criticism is familiar. It reminds you of your early childhood home in that it feels uncomfortable, but somewhat safe in its predictability. And you live with it so long in your formative years that when you are at last out from under the influence of the critical parents or siblings, you start criticizing yourself. It's true. Most of the time, these criticisms, you start taking over where they left off. You start criticizing yourself. Most of the time, these criticisms are very harsh, sometimes even cruel. And you assign them without knowing what you're doing in almost every situation. I'm going to give you an example of this, okay? I think this is going to make it clear. Let's say you're in a hurry and you have been in a store and time has gotten away from you, and you rush out of the store and jump in your car late to a meeting, and you're backing out of your parking place and you hit the car behind you. Okay. Now what's really happened here? Free your mind for a minute and just stay with me, okay? What's really happened here? Nothing more than you were in a hurry. You were not watching. You had an accident. Nothing else is happening other than you're going to be later to the meeting because you now have to call the police, right? And file a report. So where's the self-attack in that? You're right to say there isn't any, because those are just the facts. Those are just the facts. Now, human beings who self-attack don't stop with facts. You've been trained to self-attack, and you've been trained by people who self-attack too, and who self-attacked and who attacked you out of their penchant for self-attacking. So the programming that is going to go on in your mind, insidiously, usually beyond the conscious mind, because after all, the conscious mind is involved in the details of what you've got to do now, filing the police report and all the other things that we have to do in a situation like this. So the subconscious mind, or the other than conscious mind, I should say, is going into overdrive with something like this. You are a hot mess. You'll always ruin everything. You can't do anything right. You're not enough. I'm never enough. I have failed again. I will always fail. I'm not a responsible person, and I never will be. My father was right. I can't trust myself, and no one should ever trust me. Everyone is going to be disappointed in me because this accident proves, it is evidence that I am an idiot, and I don't deserve to have anybody ever love me. Now, if you think that's extreme, I want you to listen. Oh, hello, Dominique. Good morning from Houston, Texas. How wonderful you're hearing us out there in Houston today. Thank you for tuning in. So I want you to realize that a program like this, that's all about how bad you are, is usually running underneath something like this. This, my dears, is a self-attack. Many times it is subconscious. And the key component in self-attack is that the person self-attacking just can't accept the facts without layering all the childhood stuff on top of it. And the childhood stuff is how you interpreted appearances as a child. And guys, because you had the child mind and not the global mind, the adult mind, you didn't interpret correctly. You interpret it very narrowly. We're going to explain that in just a minute. Well, good morning from Ottawa, Canada, Angela. Hello. You know, we have a lot of guests from Canada that tune into this show, and it's just one of my favorite spots. So hello to all my Canadians out there. So when you self-attack, it can't just be about the incident. Oh no, you've got to vilify yourself, emotionally layering and burdening yourself with ideas that are just not true, except in the child's mind. And because they're in the child's mind, you're still gathering evidence that your childhood assumptions about yourself and your world and your God and your family and your community and the world, by the way, the world at large, are true. We've got to challenge that, guys, because they're not true. They're only from the child's perspective, you see. These were the only explanations you could formulate when you were a child, and you didn't have all the facts because you didn't have the developed and more sophisticated brain that could handle the context of what was going on. After all, to a child, everything is about the child. A child is entirely self-focused. They're trying to figure out themselves relative to mom, to dad, to the dog, to God, to the outside world, to danger, to fear, to love, to everything, you see? You had to explain things going on in your childhood to survive. Children cannot live in a totally random world where nothing makes sense. So the child's mind goes about making sense of things. And because they're self-focused in nature, like we just talked about, and see everything relative to them, they formulate opinions that help them survive but are not true, or are only partially true. And if there is something going on in the home, and especially if the parents are not taking responsibility for it, nor fixing it, or making any attempt to do so, the child more often than not sees the problem as him. By the way, I'm using the male term just to represent mankind. It doesn't imply a sexual gender. So the child sees the problem as him, even if it's not, by the way. The ideas he forms about himself before he's 8 years old will be his excuses for himself, and that he will use his whole life until he becomes more aware and conscious and decides to stop. Now, while self-attacking sounds distinctly unpleasant, we keep doing it. So I think we ought to address why. We've talked about one of them. It's familiar. But there's another reason. It is part of a system that soothes you. It's part of a system that soothes you. And that feels good. Now let me explain. If you carry these negative beliefs about yourself that all come to the surface when something like the accident that we just talked about happens, you constantly, but many times subconsciously, have a lot of anxiety. And because you have a lot of anxiety, you don't feel safe in your life. You don't have a strong sense of self. We're going to address this later. You believe you are a victim, battling mercifully the happenstance in a hard and frightening world. What other people do and say usually really rock a person like this, because they were rocked by mother and dad when they did similar things. This is a constant programming in most of us that we never get to unless we study consciousness or psychology or do some sort of therapy or talk to somebody about this and get it all worked through. Some discipline usually has to take us there. This constant programming lies in wait to attach itself to situations that don't really warrant it. Again, you just had an accident and you're going to be later. Those are the facts. You weren't watching. That's a fact. It doesn't mean you're stupid. Can you see this enormous assumptive leap that the child mind does? Because it's got evidence that something is wrong with you from your past, and you're trying to find evidence up here in life, in this moment, that supports that, until we don't. Okay. The reason I'm doing a show like this is really we keep doing this throughout our lives until we wake up and realize what we're doing. So there are many ways to self-attack. There are many more than I'm going to name, but I'm going to name some common ones. You might want to write these down so you can just watch for them in your personal life, because if you find yourself doing that, you can self-correct. If you don't see it, you can't do anything about it, and it goes by and becomes an entrenched pattern, because every time you use something, you're going to have me say this several times to you, you convince yourself you have to use it. Kind of like the snake swallowing its tail. Where's the beginning? Every time you use something, you convince yourself you have to use it. So it's an ongoing cycle. All right, so let's talk about the ways that we self-attack. We make ourselves feel guilty. I think I did a show on guilt, if I'm not mistaken. At least I think I've said this part before, but who knows? I may have said it in my classes. There are two kinds of guilt. There is appropriate guilt, and there is inappropriate guilt, when you're just guilty, but there's nothing to feel guilty about. It's all made up in your head, right? Now, if you are appropriately guilty, I'm all for apologizing and saying, look at what I did, okay? And please forgive me for doing it. But the insidiousness is the inappropriate guilt. A self-attack is often inappropriate guilt. Okay? You just are looking for something to make you feel yourself feel bad. So if you can say, look at how bad I am. You know, oftentimes I confront my clients and I'll say, okay, tell me why you're so bad. Now this is once, by the way, they have done some consciousness work, right? And they'll sit there and they really have a funny little look on their face, and they all say the same thing as if it was scripted in the sky, right? They say, I can't think of anything that's not an excuse. It's true. You really can't think of anything that's not an excuse. It's all an excuse. There's nothing to feel guilty about. You're just beating yourself up from the past. You're just self-attacking. Another way we self-attack is certainly the overt methodology of cutting oneself when you can't handle the pain and you don't have an emotional vocabulary or an emotional maturity or an emotional intelligence, and you can't express yourself and work out a problem. You cut yourself because it's very, very painful to not address the problem. This is somebody that is not addressing the problem and is doing what the child's mind has always done, which is suppressing emotion. And so they have to resort to such an extreme self-attack. Another self-attack is that you manipulate other people. Now, by the way, you're always manipulating yourself when you manipulate other people, which only proves to you that you don't believe you're enough to get what you want if you don't manipulate and you're honest, right? Another way we self-attack is you self-blame and shame yourself. Sometimes over the slightest infractions. You generalize. You had a mean mother, so all women are mean. You had a cruel father, so all men are cruel. Those are generalizations. And generalizations are self-attacks too, because you're telling yourself that something that isn't true. These negatives are so bad, not because they're negative, although that's one of them, but they are extremely negative and they hurt you because they're not true. You see. Keep in mind, none of this makes mental, logical sense. But we're not dealing with that part of you, the mental, logical sense, mental realm. We're dealing with the emotional body, and there are distortions and contradictions all over the place. There are self-attacks all over the place. Okay. Hi, Kimberly. So glad you joined us. Hello. Okay. Here's some more ways we self-attack. You make yourself the victim. That's a self-attack because you're not, right? Look, when I say you're not, let me explain that. We're all the victim. We're all the victim. We're all so much more than that too. We're all anything we choose to be. But when you're self-attacking, that's the only thing you choose to be. Now, here's the rub, though. We make ourselves the victim, and we soothe ourselves in its familiarity. And we despise ourselves for taking on that role still yet. Again, we're doing the very thing we despise, and yet we do it over and over and over again. And as I said, self-attack, one of the reasons we're doing it, it's part of a system of soothing ourselves. We self-attack, we soothe ourselves. What do you do when you self-attack? Well, you say terrible things to yourself, right? You isolate, you withdraw, you drink too much, you smoke too much, you do enormous things. You may go out and sleep with people that you don't know. You may do all sorts of things. Life has a way of dealing with all this in a million ways. Your behaviors are not the problem. The problems are why you do this underneath. And the fact is that when we do these things, that we self-attack ourselves over, we soothe ourselves. We find ways to soothe ourselves. And a life that hasn't had much soothing, that feels good. So we're hooked on soothing ourselves. And we got to keep the self-attack going to do so. You understand that? Convoluted. Everything exists in this emotional realm for us. You see? Okay. More ways to self-attack. We become very dramatic. We're histrionic. We're full of drama. And we hate ourselves for doing this too. Because we're not really going down there and addressing what's wrong. It's a distraction. We know it is. We know it is. Anybody who's looking, by the way, knows it is too. And we think we're getting away with it, which is manipulation of ourselves. It's certainly a self-attack. So, by the way, often with new clients, they're so cute because they'll say, I'm so confused. I want to take that away from you, and here's why I'm going to say it. We say we're confused when we're blocking our knowing the truth. We're not yet ready for it, okay? So just listen. Go back and listen to the show again when you think you might be ready for it. Don't worry about it. It is human nature. I'm so confused. But confusion is an issue. We choose it because it's perfectly marvelous, because society walks around out there saying they're confused. So that's a good excuse. But it is an excuse. Okay. You know, I don't mind us delaying our progress. I don't mind you doing anything that you do. My God, I've done it all right, to block who I am. But I do want to say that we've got to be honest about it. That's it. And that's what this show is about. Let's either get through it or let's be honest about what we're doing and that we don't want to lose it yet. That's it. Okay. Continuing on. We self-attack by self-sacrificing when we know we're not going to get anything back at all. But after all, keeping busy does keep us from looking at ourselves and what we have to change, so it serves a purpose, right? Because if we really see what we're doing, the next thought is, I need to change. I have to change. That's scary. We haven't yet made our peace with change. You'll hear other shows about that. If you listen to the radio shows on Blog Talk Radio, Facebook Live, they're all free, by the way, everything we put out there. And of course, everything, when I'm talking about consciousness, it's such a huge subject, and there's so many intricate levels. I try to address little ones each week. But they all work together in one big old tapestry. Okay. So keeping ourselves busy, worrying about others, or being too busy and self-sacrificing for others, or blaming ourselves or others, it's much easier than really looking at ourselves and changing our minds and then going about changing our lives. The child's mind doesn't know how to change things, so it is afraid of change. It doesn't have the developed mind, so being afraid and avoiding change was its only recourse to presumably keep safe. Sorry about the dog barking. The adult mind is capable of finding out how to change oneself. You just need more information. You might need a good guide. And when you change the inner, the outside changes. I guarantee you. But we have to address the inner. And all the self-attacks in the world that take you away from the fact that you have to address the inner are not in your best interest. We self-attack by only seeing through, by the way, a negative filter. It's if we put on glasses, here are my glasses, right? But they have a lens on them that only lets you see certain things. So we see what's wrong with us. We see the lack of things. What's wrong with others. We see what we don't have. We see that we see everything that we were deprived of in our childhood, tangible or intangible. We see those things instead of an abundant world filled with the opportunities that we can create for ourselves, right? We self-attack by being shallow, by staying on the surface of our emotional lives, by repeating the same patterns over and over again and hoping for the better result next time. Somebody's definition of insanity, by the way. I call it fantasy. I call it magical thinking. This is magical thinking. Magical thinking has its own reward, guys. You can't create anything out of fantasy. You go there because it's not real. Okay. We self-attack by exaggerating things or diminishing things. We exaggerate what we should not be exaggerating as a problem. We call it catastrophizing. Thank you, Angela. I appreciate it. We call it catastrophizing. Or, by the way, we diminish things as well. We minimalize danger. I had a dear client of mine who's making wonderful progress, but she still has some stuck points around creating a relationship. She was online dating, and she dated a man, I don't think more than 2 times, 3 times at the most, that turned out to be out and out a crazy person. I'm not even going to tell you all the ways he was crazy, but I was really worried for her safety because he knew where she lived. She had not been discriminating. She had not been careful. And yet, as dangerous as this situation was, I saw this woman who, by the way, catastrophizes other things, like that aren't catastrophes. She has quite a lot of money in the bank. She's always poor, okay? But in this case, when she was genuinely in some sort of danger, he's not good. She wouldn't even talk about it. It was just a generality. No, I'm fine. Guys, we have to look at that. That's not safe. That's not good. If you're exaggerating what should not be exaggerated and minimalizing what should not be minimized, we have to have you see reality clearly. And this is all part of a self-attack. You understand? Okay. Last week I did a show on denial. I want to put on the table that denial is self-attack. Go back and listen to that show if you missed it. Again, all of these shows are archived on Blog Talk Radio or on Facebook Live. They're all free. Now, let me put this on the table. If God is everything, and God is all you are, now keep in mind the thing that's confusing about God, if you're new to me, is that God appears according to our understanding. It's according to our understanding, that's the key phrase, as either the absence of itself, lack, okay, or the fullness of itself, abundance. The lack of the absence of God is always fear-based. The fullness of God is always love-based. Our spiritual journey, our sacred journey, our quest to be our potential lies in the journey from the fear-based self to the love-based self. This is not a man-woman love. This is love. This is who you really are in your authentic self. So if God is everything, the high and the low frequencies we've just talked about, and if God is all you are, the high and the low frequencies, the ego child's mind is certainly all the low frequencies, the higher frequencies your highest self, then you, my dears, because God is everything, God is all you are everything too. You're the good, the bad, the light, the shadow. You are everything. And if we're so busy telling ourselves and others how great we are, because we are not accepting the all of us as human beings, it is at the expense of real happiness, where we say, I forgive myself everything, I'm just human here, but human is not an excuse. And because I have compassion for myself now, I have compassion for others, and I can make conscious and deliberate choices to be more loving and to be the part of God that I choose. And by the way, the part of God that you're even listening to a radio show like this to know more about. You see? Gee, I hope I'm explaining a complicated subject. Let me know if you don't understand what I'm saying, and certainly write me or call me and let me know that you need more explanation, okay? Our call-in number is 347-850-1647. Now, let's go back. I think we self-attack as well by mind reading. What's another person thinking about me? What's another person thinking here when they did that? Or we self-attack by motive guessing. Why'd they do that? Huh? What is their reason for doing that? They are two very self-destructive habits and are about you and your self-protection rather than about the person standing in front of you that you really need to have a dialogue with. Okay? The only way to honor yourself and others... Oh, thank you, Angela. Angela did tell me I'm totally relating with what you were saying. Thank you. It's nice to hear from people. It's nice to hear what you're hearing. Thank you so much. My challenge, guys, is always bringing really hard information down to size for you and me. It's not just for you, it's for me too. So anyway, all right, here we go. The emotionally mature thing to do, rather than mind reading and motive guessing, is something we never think of in our child's mind. But here it is. I'm going to put it on the table. For heaven's sakes, honor the person by asking what they mean. What are you thinking? What are you meaning? Could you tell me what you really... Thank you, sweetheart. Could you tell me what you really mean by that? I'm trying to do something else with it from my background. I'd like to know where you're coming from when you say that. That's the emotionally mature thing to do. Have a dialogue. Work it through. We also self-attack by not listening to what the other person is saying. But more importantly, by not listening to what God is saying to us. You see, all of us cooperates with bringing whatever is in our lives, okay, to us. The ego child's mind brings things they're familiar in because it is familiar. It's part of your soothing process. It's part of your past. And even if it isn't pleasant, you, to a certain extent, know where the rocks in the water are. It never occurs to you there's smoother sailing beyond that. Your highest self brings in these patterns because it's hoping that at last you'll change. It is a compliment, although a back-asswards one, because it's saying you're now equipped to deal with this problem. So if you just will not avoid it, you'll find out you're quite equipped to deal with the problem. You might need more information about how to deal with it, but you're perfectly equipped. We self-attack with the word should. I think this is one of the most destructive words in our language and probably in any other language. We beat ourselves up over what we're not doing and what we did do that we shouldn't have. I really do urge you with all my heart to drop the words should from your vocabulary. Tune into how often you think it and say it and stop yourself. But the only way you're going to stop yourself is to listen to yourself and listen to your thoughts and listen to what's coming out of your mouth. Because a lot of our shoulds are not overt. A lot of them are internal. Oh, hello, Susan. Oh dear, I'm so delighted. Oh, bless your heart. thank you for saying this. She's saying that I'm relating so much. And I really appreciate this. Thank you. Thank you very much, darling. I want to say to all of you that are listening, please get on my website, which is Martha Burgess, Burgess, Novak, Novak.net. We have all sorts of programs. I can teach you directly, and you can certainly work with me as a coach. But I have trained several people that are posted on that website that I have such incredible confidence in as marvelous healers. And you're certainly welcome to write me and ask me to call you, and I will be delighted to call you and talk with you about who would be best and what our program is about if you'd like help through what we're doing. We are very precise in what we do. In a 2-hour session, and the sessions are 2 hours, we are figuring out how you're wired mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually beyond what you might know currently about yourself. I do think that sometimes what blocks us is not what we know about ourselves, but what we are not letting ourselves know about ourselves. So we try to be a step ahead of you in that. Susan, I'm going to read the rest of your email because right now it says see more, and I want to certainly do that. I want to read the whole thing, and I'm not sure it's going to let me do that right now, but I certainly will. Oh, there we are. Thank you so much for saying that. We appreciate your input. All right, so that said, these shoulds, oh my God, for God's sake, tune in to how often you're using them internally and externally. A should, I want you to realize the destructive nature of a should. A should is a force. And you're not going to do anything that forces you. You're not. We might as well put it on the table. You're not going to be forced. Your parents or somebody forced you when you were younger. And you rebelled against that. And you're still rebelling against that. As a matter of fact, you are biologically wired for that. You see? We go toward pleasure and we go away from pain. And force is pain when we interpret it as force. Now, there's a certain level of your development as a child. There is age-related training, and you will hear me referring to that from time to time, where there is a window where a child in their development should learn something. And there is a window in the development when a child should learn about finding the positivity in things that they don't necessarily want to do. Now, I'm not talking about force in this case. I'm talking about, we have to, I'll give you a perfect example of this. So I believe this was a woman, it was a number of years ago in some of my business classes. There was a woman who came to me, and she was an executive with this big company, and she had to lecture her whole company on the new no smoking policy in the company. Now, of course, this was a number of years ago, right? And she was very upset about it herself because she was a smoker and she felt that she was being forced to go outside to smoke and to only smoke at certain times of the day, and whatever the policy was, she did not like these rules, and she was not going to do a good job introducing this to the whole company in a lecture. So, I can't remember whether she came to me or a boss came to me, but this was the problem, right? And I said, well, let me see what you're going to say, and sure enough, it was just full of resentment. And the resentment actually came from her childhood when she had very forceful parents who forced her into this or that or the other, right? Reminds me of something else I want to tell you from yesterday. Anyway, what we tried to do then is help her adult mind see that there was a positive in this. First of all, she didn't think smoking was good for her, but she hadn't yet given it up. And it was her own prejudice against herself that was causing the confusion. So as soon as she saw a larger perspective that this is probably better for me, that it's a little more inconvenient for me to go and smoke, and this is better for everybody because they don't have to breathe any cigarette smoke in the building, and everything can be a lot cleaner, she absolutely accepted that. Now, it's interesting because I'm a little off the subject here. I'll go back to self-attack in a minute. But yesterday, I want to stick with the age-appropriate training and how hard it is, actually, for parents to know what to do here. One of my darling healers, as a matter of fact, in my advanced class, said, I have a question. My parents forced me to take piano lessons. I happened to be very good at piano when I was young, and I was very good at it. But they forced me. I stopped enjoying it at one point because I had a really bad teacher who was very mean to me. And so my parents wouldn't let me quit. They wouldn't let me become a quitter to them. And so I was forced 4 years to take piano that I absolutely hated. And for some reason, then they let me out of this. And she said, so what does a parent do in a circumstance like this? And I say, the same thing you do if you said, okay, you don't have to take anymore. Neither one of those are good choices. Here's the only choice in this. Sweetie, why would you like to stop? If they asked that question, she would said, I have a mean teacher. I don't like the way he teaches me. He's very hard and harsh on me, and I'd like a softer touch, even if she doesn't have the words for that, and she only says he's a mean teacher. The parent ought to be aware enough to go, before she absolutely detests and reacts to them and they're forcing her, the parent ought to go, well, let's find you a different teacher and see if you enjoy it better. Let's find you somebody soft and sweet who will be more encouraging. You see? So the answer is listening. The answer is finding out why and working through the problem. Not quitting or not quitting. You see? Okay. So what happens when we come out of a situation like that is because we become our parents to ourselves, and they're mirroring kind of bad parenting here, all of a sudden we become the force. We force ourselves with these damn shoulds to do things that are not in our best interest, instead of saying, why do I want to do it? Why do I not want to do it? Is this an issue I need to get through? Should is a force, and you're going to not do anything that forces you, like I said. You're turning yourself into a parent that didn't parent well. The parent who forces you. Where is your personal choice in this? Where are your reasons? Where's your working through anything? If you are afraid of personal choice because you think you're going to do something wrong, get help with this, because that came directly from your parents too. They did tell you were wrong and punished you when you didn't do what they said, when what they think you should have done. You can't live anybody else's life but yours and be happy, my dears. You have to find what you are and what you want to do. Personal choice is born out of personal responsibility. And let me tell you, it's a joy when you're in the highest self. That's where you create everything. But in the egoic child's mind, it's terrifying, because you think you're going to get what you did when you were young. And by the way, you still are getting everything that you got when you were young, because you are self-attacking when you don't live up to some sort of expectations that you didn't even know you had. So you better find out what those expectations are, because you're beating yourself up for something many times that is impractical and impossible, and a standard that you were forced to meet that honestly was beyond you in your training and in your development. That's a heck of a way to live. And we can make ourselves a hell of a lot happier if we take all that off. So be aware of your shoulds and shouldn'ts, please. All right, let's keep going. We self-attack also by justifying and rationalizing our thoughts, feelings, and actions. And by the way, surrounding ourselves with people who have the same issues. Look at what you're trying to justify. I was really, really proud of a client yesterday. Because when I saw her, she's buying a house. And when I saw her, she was very resentful that the seller thought that they had given and given and given all this, and she herself thought she had given a lot, and they were not appreciating that, which, by the way, is one of her old stories. She tells herself, nobody appreciates me, but she was setting herself up not to be appreciated. I pointed this out to her and said, why don't you write a letter to their agent and say, I would appreciate your passing this on to your clients, but here is what I have given, and it has been quite generous, so I feel like that we are even in that, and we're both very integrous people, and that we can work this out now. There was a little sticking point, you see. Well, she took that and she ran with it. By gosh, she did. And for the first time in her life, she was her own press agent. Here is what we've done. There was no resentment. It was the sweetest little letter. It was just the facts, not layering all this stuff of resentment. See, the resentment comes when you don't. When you're not your own advocate. When you are being self-attacking and self-destructive in these ways we're talking about. You see? So I'm so proud of her. Wow, it was a fabulous letter. Fabulous. And your resentment goes away when you're finally just telling what the truth is. Okay. Self-attack is also promoted, and you are promoting it. It's self-perpetuating, of course, when you cross your own boundaries or you let somebody else cross your boundaries because you don't know what your boundaries are. And I want to talk about that for a minute. You have to know where your boundaries are. Morally, ethically, lovingly. You have to have a sense of yourself and an integrity about that to know where your boundaries are. You have to know what you value about yourself. This can't be based on issues, and it often is. You know, we use OCD. Well, here are my boundaries. No, that's a rule. That's not a boundary. A boundary is just what you can live with. I also have an example of that this week. I have a dear friend who is being put in rather a difficult situation by her brother. Her brother is having an affair. And her brother has asked her to keep his secret. He is married. He is getting divorced. And sometimes he has asked her to say he's with her. Now, I've worked very hard on my client and her sense of self. And so this incredible breach, which she has done one time because she was so shocked this man even asked, she said yes, and she let it happen. And she felt so horrendous after that. Guess what? She went right into self-attack. Right back through the old door that we've worked so hard to get her out of. So I pointed that out. And she said, absolutely, I crossed my boundary. What can you live with without any problems at all, even if it's not the popular decision? You always have to ask yourself that. What can I live with that I have said or done? And what can I not live with? What's a breach of the integrity of my sense of self? Darlings, you have to have self-respect. And every time we do something like this, every time we lie, every time we people please, every time we say yes when we're afraid to say no, or we say no when we're afraid to say yes, we are crossing something very precious, our boundaries. And this is going to tear down your self-respect, which tears down your self-esteem, which really tears down your sense of self, of your who you are as the authority of you, who you are authentically as the spiritual being you are in physical form. Do you understand? I think you do. When your boundaries are breached by you, or when you allow it to be breached by someone else, you are diminished, and that never feels good. And if we do this in a constant way, we suffer terribly. And guys, all this is movable. You can have so much more than this. You don't have to do this anymore. You know why? Because it's all energy. Everything is energy. Energy is movable. And energy is just behavior. So it results in different behaviors, you see, when the energy is changed. That's why I do believe that energy work is extremely powerful. And the energy that you are doing comes from these old beliefs that are all down there. And you see them as self-attacks, and we've got to address them. It's not going to kill you to address them. It's going to set you free. Self-attack is always personal. So when you take things personally, whatever happens out there in the world, you, my dear, are self-attacking. You're doing it to yourself. You generalize. And then you see other people doing it to you because you're doing it to yourself first. And an extreme version of this becomes paranoia, right? There is wonderful help all around for self-attack. Let's talk about it. Darlings, get a guide, get an energy worker, get a consciousness coach. Now, when I was coaching actors, I always said, study with a coach that when you get really good can actually help your career and recommend you to an agent or somebody else. Can get you into a movie, can get you doing this or that. So for heaven's sakes, when you get help, start somewhere, but eventually you're going to want to get somebody who's been through the same thing and has turned out to be a success in some sort of consciousness work. I'm very proud of the people that have studied so diligently with me. There's not one person on that website that hasn't studied at least 13 or 14 years with me. Some of them have studied as much as 18 years with me. This is a life choice to be able to do all this, not some sort of affectation. And there is no ego in any of this, because you don't get to be one of my master facilitators without having little ego involved in this anymore. We all just want what's best for you. So please make a phone call. There's some websites. There's some websites, I believe. There's some phone numbers. If not phone numbers, there's certainly emails for these people on our website, marthaburgessnovak.net. It's important that you learn your patterns, that you call things by name, that you learn to be emotionally fluid and intelligent. The truth really does set you free. I'm telling you, I'm a textbook example of this. I'm the poster boy for this work and for other work like this, quite frankly. Listen to yourself. You've got to learn to do that. Hear what you're doing. Understand why you're doing it. See it in the context of your early childhood home. This is not an excuse, it's an explanation for your behaving like you have. And an explanation leads you to something very powerful. It puts you in the larger context of what was really happening beyond what the child's mind thought. Again, the child mind thinks it's all about them. There was a larger context here. And until you see the large context, you cannot forgive yourself and others. And that's what you're learning through this process. And that is going to set you free, bring you into the now, bring you into mindfulness. And that's where you create the life you want without all these emotional layering and encumbrances that you put on every single thing that happens to you. God is in every single thing that happens to you, in high and low degrees according to your understanding. And you get much better results if you understand everything, if you understand more, if you understand that this moment of pain is just teaching you something, it's just opening you up to something else, and is not the end. Isn't that a wonderful thing to know? Eventually, you are going to realize, and I mean this with all my heart, that you are quite the nice person. There's nothing to see. All these fears that you've been avoiding about yourself, all these, I'm not accepting this or that about myself, all this structure you built around avoiding all this bad stuff isn't true. You're going to find out you're nothing but love. And you've just done these things as a distortion of love because in your early childhood home, love couldn't be love. So it had to turn into fear. It had to turn into rage. It had to turn into this or that. But here's how this works. I'm going to explain this very cryptic line. Nothing can turn into itself that is not at first itself. Want me to repeat that? Nothing can turn into itself that is not at first itself. Case in point. Water turns into ice, and ice can turn into water because it was first water to begin with. Now let's bring it into our spiritual arena. Love was all you were as the undeveloped whole. Love got distorted into disgust and rage and anger and jealousy and fear of all kinds. Anxiety. Guess what it all is? It's love that couldn't be itself. And just like that ice cube, when you get these distortions of your thinking and feeling out of you from the ego child's mind, and you've made that transition more and more into the highest self, you turn out to be more loving. You're making the decisions to be more loving, and you're no longer terrified and avoiding and spending all that energy avoiding being everything, because, yeah, you are. But you're making decision because you have accepted everything to be more loving instead. Boy, does it feel better than the other, guys. I think that feeling of being closer to who God really is and through your ascended mind is one of the reasons we all want it so badly and are so willing once we start having a feeling of it. We go real fast into letting the child's mind go. The hard stuff is convincing you to let that child's mind go and to stop telling your story and to accept the whole. That's where the work is very difficult and hard going. I know, I did it. But it gets easier and easier and easier. I'm here to tell you, and better and better and better. And there's not one of those people on my list and anybody else I work with that doesn't say in the end, gosh, life is so much better. Unbelievably better than the way it was. And I want to say one more thing, and that is, this isn't a finish line you cross. Every one of these people are working through something still, but they see everything in such a large perspective, and they don't suffer like they used to. And it's a wonderful learning experience, and they're more grateful, and they're creating better lives for themselves. You find that what love really is when you do this work. Beyond, and the love is really beyond anything we think it is. You can genuinely turn into an altruist. You really can find unconditional love in you. But until we do this kind of work, we all think love is about running around trying to get somebody to love us. And it isn't about that at all. It's about being love itself and attracting what you are. We find out what love is through consciousness work. And one of my greatest joys was finding my husband, Michael. And I realized that this was about completing the love that I so long worked to be by having someone to give it to and putting love in action. That's a big deal. You're going to find out through this process, too, that there has never been anyone to self-attack you or to attack you at all but you. There's never been anyone to attack you but you since you left your early childhood home. The past is over. By the way, so is the story. You're going to find that out. And you'll have a joyous, good time decorating the now with all the things that you want. It's never too late to have a happy childhood because you can give it to yourself. But not out of the ego, not out of grasping and feeling deprived and doing something like that, but out of finding out in the higher consciousness that you were never deprived at all. And the reason I say that is that everything is in you right now. It was in you when you were born. We got to get these things out of our way that stop you from being that authentic, true person of the higher thought. The only thing that makes us unhappy with any situation in life is self-attack. Circumstances, for circumstances' sake, don't make us unhappy. Can you see how now that you're so much more resilient going through life's vicissitudes like divorce or serious illness or the loss of a job or anything else, if you don't emotionally layer? I hope you can see that now. For God's sake, we don't ever want some of these things that happen to us, but life inevitably brings us the death of people we love, for example. And if you don't emotionally layer that, you can just accept that as what it is. If you can accept the loss of a job, I just lost a job because God wants to move me on, instead of saying I wasn't good enough, or all the other things we say to ourselves, man, you'll get right back on the wagon and find a better job. If you don't emotionally layer when you have to get a divorce, God forbid, but if you do, you do. And how much easier is it to get on your feet again and do the things you need to do with joy and gratitude in your heart than going, nobody loves me. Guys, you're emotionally layering from the childhood. And this is the damage. This is the self-attack. Rather than self-attack, I want to suggest you go in a different direction. Because, I mentioned this earlier, I'm going to mention it again, every single time you use self-attack, and remember, you're getting something out of it. You get soothed once you do it, right? Every single time, though, that you self-attack and you use the system, you entrench your ego child's mind, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. You are convincing yourself you have to use it again because you never take a chance on exploring other options. You never learn how to work through some of these problems. And we need for you to learn to work through some of these problems because everything is solvable. It's all solvable. So what if you, instead of entrenching your ego child's mind and supporting it by doing all the things we've talked about in the show, what if you're supporting your highest self instead? What if you're supporting the fact that you are everything? And in that everything, you will accept all you are, and you have all this energy coming back in the moment. And what if you say, I'm the light in the dark, and the light is so much more pleasant and so much more comfortable, and all of the pure love of God, and it feels so good, and I want to be this more. I'm going to address some of the dark. I'm going to address all of the dark. I'm going to say everything is me, but I choose this. I choose a higher self. I choose love. I choose to be resilient. I choose creativity. I choose all the resources of God that I am. What would your life be like then? Guys, it's right there. It's right there. You just have to look at yourself. And when you do, at one point, and this is a corner turning, you're going to have little glimpses of this along the way, that you are going to be facing life with such resilience and love and gratitude until you face it every time that way. Wow. What a gift, huh? It's all in you. That's the promise of God to you. That's the reason you have this duality inside of you, ego, child's mind, higher self. That's the divine quest for all of us. We don't get there by denying our dark side. We get there by accepting it and making different choices and forgiving ourselves and all others. Thank you so much for listening to this show. I think I am finished for today. We are here every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You might want to just put down in your book our call-in number. Our guest call-in number is always 347-850-1647. You're welcome to call me and talk about anything. I always love to know what's on your minds. And you certainly can email me, www.theburgessprocess.com. No, at yahoo.com. That's it, theburgessprocess@yahoo.com. You can find it on my website, marthaburgessnovak.net, even if I made a mistake without remembering it correctly. I'd love to know what you're thinking and feeling. I do suggest so strongly that you form study groups around some of these teachings. It's a marvelous support system. I'm delighted to talk to your group about some of this, and it's a great way to learn. All right. You have lots of resources on that. Oh, darling, thank you. Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Angela. Thank you so much, Kat. Both of you are just dear to me, and I appreciate everything. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you like us, please contact, I think there's something on Blog Talk Radio that says share this with your social media. For heaven's sake, share these shows, please. Share the website, share everything. If you're getting something out of these things with your friends. And I say just send it out and see who responds, because you never know what's in people's heart. You never know who's reaching out for things. And who, by the way, turns them away. You just don't know. But we appreciate that kind of thing, and that you follow us and that you share and all that kind of stuff on social media. And get the word around that we are here and doing this. I do it for you. I do it for us. And I hope you enjoy things. Let's do a prayer. And don't forget the app, by the way. It's only for iPhones. And it will soon be for Droid. I'll make an announcement about that when it comes out. But you can find it at the App Store under the Teacup Prophecies for 99 cents. I think you'll enjoy it. Okay. Dear God, who is all there is, you who are all we are, and all everything is in this world, thank you so much. As we open ourselves now to surrender whatever we can of what we've learned today, as things have flitted across our minds, we are giving them up. We're saying, dear God, please take us down deeper into more global thinking, into a more conscious and accepting experience of living, of love, of you. We know that you are all we are. You are not separate from us in any way. You're here inside. Help us listen to you and help us distinguish the voice of the highest self, the ego child's mind self. the ego, child's mind self, that's always self-indulgent and self-absorbed and always says it's me at the expense of you, or you at the expense of me, which is all about me still, by the way. Or is it the highest self, which is all about love and creating win-win situations to agree or disagree wherever we grow? It is an agreement. And wherever we go and with whom we speak with, help us create that kind of connection, that we all may be nourished by being channels for the love that we all deserve, whether we demonstrate that we deserve it or not. Dear God, thank you so much for all of this. We now clear, release, and cancel all of these things down to the deepest level inside of us and all dimensions of self. We ask now to surrender all issues, blocks, needs to hold on to them, vestiges and related issues. We ask that we clear, release, and cancel all of our defenses, and that we can cancel all of our life pattern choices. And we ask to see things differently from a broader and more spiritual perspective. We thank you for all of this, dear God. We say this prayer now in your name and in the name of the Ascended Masters, in the name of our love-centered guides and friends, and in the name of each and every person listening and watching this show today. We thank you so much. We say this prayer now, knowing these things are fully so. And so it is. Amen. Thank you again. We'll be here next week, and I love every one of you. Thank you for listening and sticking with me, okay? Take care now.